Good evening, everybody. I hope everyone's doing well. Um, can I just get a thumbs up if you can hear me loud and clear? Great stuff. Thank you. So, as we discussed in our last week's session, the beginning part of this session, I just want to go over the pacer for this assignment. Um, and then we'll move on to our content, which is Learning Unit 2. Just want to share my screen quickly. So pacer. Basically, this is what the pacer looks like. All right. So I broke it down per question. And that is basically from question 1.1 right down to question 3. So there's 5 questions in total. I put down where it belongs in terms of the learning unit, and then sort of like from a marking rubric, and this is obviously most times, it's either provided to you or it's not. So I sort of just looked at the options, like the last question, it's provided to you in terms of that marking rubric because it's an essay type question. So yeah, basically it's broken down like that. Um, and if I was you, I'd follow this. So like, for instance, here it's for 15 marks. For instance, if there's 3 factors that they're asking you to comment on, you're going to have 2 marks per factor. That then gives you 6. And then the application is going to be 3 marks per application or per example. And then that will give you 9. So 15 in total. I think most of it is very similar in terms of the rubric. And then here you have, I think it's 1 more factor. So 4 factors in total with 4 examples. And then question 3 will be your essay type question. Okay, so I'm going to leave this for you to go over because I just want to share the assignment so we can have a quick run through that. Obviously, can't share 2 items at the same time, but just take a mental picture of what this is, right? I just want to share the assignment quickly. I don't think this is the one. Oh, I think that's the one. Yep. Just, can you see my screen? Okay, I'm assuming you can. Okay, so basically this is your assignment. Read through everything very, very clearly. As you can see, this is an individual assignment, so you'll have to firstly go through Turnitin. So when you're submitting, the Turnitin function will be an automatic enabler where it will spit out in terms of if there's any sort of plagiarism that's involved. So therefore your referencing needs to be on point. Um, as I said, this is an individual assignment, so no group work at all. You can go through this. However, I think I did in the first session go through referencing in terms of if there is minor errors, you'll have a 5% reduction. And if you have major errors, it can be 10% or even more. So just make sure you do have multiple attempts to submit an assignment. So if you first submit it and you do get a Turnitin percentage that's quite high, you do have an option to basically fix it and rework it in order for you to resubmit. So I will take the last submission. And I will obviously grade the last submission that's required to. Okay, assignment instructions. Please follow this because as much as quality is important or quantity is important, quality is also very important. So your assignment needs to be neat. It needs to be in correct font. You can't have one font in the first page, a different font in the second page. Let's try and keep it as professional as possible. I'm happy to share an assignment template that I used last year. It's from the faculty, but we didn't get a new one for 2026. So I'll share the 2025 one with you this afternoon, so you can already start getting accustomed to it, but adhere to some of the formatting protocols, like for instance, the font size 11, 1.5 spacing, pick to one specific font or font type, and just try and stick to that throughout your entire assignment. Structure, grammar, language, all of that very important. Then we've got here, adhere to the word count limitations. The lecturer will not mark beyond the maximum word count. If you exceed 1,000 word limit by submitting 1, 2, you could lose all your marks for that reason. So just bear in mind, I'm not as strict as that. If you do go over by a little, I'm quite fine. Also, take note that at the end of your essay, you must always add in your number of words, excluding your end referencing page. Okay, so just on question 3, because the question 3 is your essay-based question, make sure you add in the total number of words at the end of question 3. Okay, so it gives me an indication. So basically, you have 2 articles. Number 1 is granular Parsi, and the second one is fruit and vegetable juice market. Okay, that's the analysis. Obviously, I'm obviously not going to go over the case study. It's for you to go through. So here, it's cost leadership and cost leadership strategy and differentiation, which we had gone over. I think must have been in lecture 1, lecture 2, actually. And they're saying make a recommendation of the most appropriate strategy for Gran and Parsi to pursue and take advantage of that projected growth. Here for 15 marks, follow the rubric. What factors, as opposed to, let's say, for instance, you decide to choose cost leadership, what are the different factors in cost leadership, and what examples or applications can you use that is in relation to this company based on the case study that you're seeing. I am happy for you to bring in outside examples based on the research that you have conducted that is very similar to this. However, there has to be note of this company in there at the same time. Okay, then you've got critique the 3 supply chain management core functions and use examples also in the first case study, right? From an effective and efficiency perspective, also for 15 marks, very similar as well. List your factors, your 3 factors. Let's call it 2 marks each. That gives us 6 marks. The balance of your 9 marks then sits in your application. It says here very clearly, use practical examples to show how they could realize the effectiveness and efficiency in each of the function. How you decide to set it up, completely up to you. Probably a factor, an application, a factor, an application, or factor, 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 and then application thereafter. However, a lot of times your application is related to the factor you're talking about. So I would do factor and then application thereafter. Okay, I'm not telling you to write an entire 5 pages for 15 marks. No, quality is very important. However, the most important point needs to come across. Okay, then we've got question 2.1, which is the factors that influence ability of Southern African region to develop regional value chains and supply chains, which is something we're going to go through today. And then 4 factors as well. Use examples to show how the factors can hinder the attempts by Grana Parsi as well. And then this is similar because it's using 4 um, we can use like 4 different factors. We will be using 4 times 2, and then the balance will be application. So 4 factors times 2 marks each for the factor, and the balance of the marks basically sits in your application or your examples. The next one is factors in regional warehouse location. 3 factors, 3 applications, 2 marks per factor, 3 marks per application. Okay. Use your textbook, please, because what I'm going to go through today, a lot of it has to do with research that I've done to try and bring it into terms for you to understand. So make sure that you are using a lot of your textbook when you are quoting the factors, etc. use additional research. Please don't use AI. Plagiarism or turn it in immediately, sort of seize it unless you are referencing it absolutely correctly, but most times it does pick it up at the end of the day. Then the next one is contemporary organizations require supply chain managers to keep a keen eye on operations. Too much into this, but forecasting and demand planning, procurement management, and operations are typical examples of how the organizations drive internal processes and partner with different organizations. Drawing from the two articles, write an essay of a minimum of 1,000 and a maximum of 1,200 words. Okay. You need to analyze key forecasting and demand management, procurement ops for Granapasi to pay attention when they're expanding their supply chain to the SADC region to capitalize on projected demand growth. Your discussion should include practical examples related to business informed by the two articles that is provided above. Okay, so it tells you here, you focus on identifying any two behaviors underlying time series. You wouldn't know what that is right now because we haven't gotten to learning unit 3 as yet. That is for us to do next week. And then apply the 5 steps of purchasing process. That should be implemented by Granapasi. And you are required to read much wider than your textbook to answer the questions in full. You're advised to search for valid academic articles and research. So as much as they give you a good place to start, and I did say this at the beginning, it's always nice to bring in extra examples or outside of examples from the case study because it shows that you are physically doing your research. Everything is about research at the end of the day. So this is your rubric. The first one is the structure and the clarity of writing. So I look at how you do sentence construction, how's your essay structured, is there logic, are you not starting in A, going to Z, and then coming back to A? That's how you would then gain your mark in terms of structure. Content, it's what we spoke about before, your 2 behaviors and then your 5 steps of purchasing, 10 marks and then 20 marks. Your 5 steps of purchasing, you can understand even if you do 2 marks per step, you need to still do another 2 marks each from an application or an example perspective. And then lastly, it's your overall argument and synthesis. And here it's just making sure that your entire essay has a flow. You are not trying to mix different items from different places. You are basically having a flow in your essay. So realistically speaking, you can gain a lot of marks just from this essay alone. It is quite, I won't say easy, but it's quite easy to understand. Okay, it's just the understanding of it is not bad. The information is and will be provided to you, so you'll be able to understand it completely. Okay, that didn't take us too long. Is there any questions from this before I start the content part? No questions. Okay, then let's move on to our content. So in our content today, we're doing Learning Unit 2. And in Learning Unit 2, it is, wait, let me just open it quickly. In Learning Unit 2, this is basically surrounding regional spatial context, urban spatial context. It's basically from a warehousing perspective and where you are sitting at, okay, let me go, it's open. And where you are sitting at in terms of warehousing. So if you are a business that's planning on looking at different warehousing space, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. So by next week, we obviously conclude everything that's due from an assignment perspective. I will be doing a lot of focus on next week's sessions because it is forecasting. And forecasting is very important. It's something that comes out in every single assessment. Even this learning unit 2, it's quite important. It does come out in quite a bit as well. Okay, if you want to stop me or need to stop me at any point, please go ahead. And I will answer whatever questions that you may have. Okay, so firstly, we're going to go into something what we call regional spatial context. And regional spatial context is basically how a specific area relates to a larger region in terms of space, the location, the development, etc. Like for an example, Dalmas in Mpumalanga, what is it? Or where is it like? So it's located between Johannesburg or Gauteng and Mpumalanga, part of that economic zone. It is quite a major transport route to Johannesburg as well as to Pretoria. A lot of that area, the focus is on the sort of agricultural sector, the mining sector, a little bit of logistics as well. And also there's a link between like rural farming areas as well. So regional, you can understand it's somewhere where your situation is quite far out, but we'll, as we go on, you'll sort of explain, understand it as well. So the first one is location. So here we want to understand or look at the geographic distribution of warehouses in a region. Where is it clustered, concentrated? Is it an industrial transport hub, corridor? You want to understand where that specific warehouse is located, with like, is it by a highway, a port, an airport, a railroad, um, or any sort of like population center. Um, so that's how we look at it from a region, like a location perspective. Then we want to talk about accessibility and connectivity. So when you're looking at regional spatial context, you want to understand or even analyze the accessibility and the connectivity of warehouses to transport networks. So whether it means it's an easier access to like major highways or ports or airports, as well as what is the capacity of the transport infrastructure in that specific region. Is there any constraints? Is there congestion? Is there bottlenecks? You want to have as much efficiency as possible. Like in Durban, for instance, around about where like the Bayhead or the Bayhead area is where the Durban port is basically situated. The congestion there is quite bad. With trucks, with rail. Therefore, you want to see how accessible you can be if you have to go somewhere closer to that specific sector, that is maybe a transport park, etc. Then we want to look at market demand. And also, when we're looking at market demand, you want to understand where's your customer situated. So you need to consider the proximity of your warehouse to where your customer is. Um, you need to know what's your customers' sort of spending patterns or demand patterns, where they're situated, how much are they consuming, in order for you to optimize your location or your warehouse location so that you don't have too much of a warehouse transport costs. You reduce your lead times as much as possible. You also faster to market than some of your competitors based on the fact that you have a location that is close in proximity to where the biggest portion of your target market is sitting. Whether you need to also like sort of understand whether a centralized versus a decentralized distribution strategy is worth it for you. So I had a customer that sold surfwear. Okay, so it's like cool surfer dude clothes, but they're situated in Durban. However, one of their biggest target markets was in Cape Town. So to transport the last mile e-commerce deliveries from Durban to Cape Town, it ranges anything between 3 to 4 days. Whereas if we looked at, and you're still paying a higher transport cost per shipment based on the fact that it's a main center to main center delivery. So by them looking at a decentralized option, they now have a facility in Durban and then a smaller facility in Cape Town, which housed most of their popular stock. By keeping it there, they were then able to get an intracity transport rate, as well as they were faster to market. They could offer same day deliveries, they could offer early morning deliveries to their customer. And it basically, at the end of the day, gives you a competitive advantage because you're able to service your customer at a much higher service level than some of your competitors. Then we have land use and zoning. You're going to see this come across quite a bit in this specific learning unit. And that's basically speaking about all of your land use regulations, any restrictions when it comes to classification that's involved, the environmental concerns. Obviously, a lot of it is done from a government or local government perspective, which we're going to go over as we progress in the learning unit. Sorry, I'm losing my words today. Then we want to look at your supply chain network design. So you want to look at, especially when you want to look at warehousing, you want to look at a broader supply chain network. Consider a lot of different factors, whether it is um, optimizing your network a lot better, or it's positioning your inventory in the best possible space that you can. Um, how are you placed in terms of your warehousing in order for you to support an omni-channel or e-commerce deliveries or a multi-mode transportation, so you're going to have to look at your entire supply chain and then make a very informed decision. Like, I was looking for property not too long ago, for another office that we want to open up, or another branch that we want to open up. I had to take all of these things into account. Where is the location that I should be at? I need the roller shutter door. I need loading bays. It need to be situated not far off a freeway. It needs to have accessibility to 12-meter trucks. Um, it needs to be neat and clean in case I'm operating in the medical field. So I had to fully understand. And also the STEM is very important, where you situated to where you service. If I'm servicing up until like 70 Ks from me, um, is it still accessible for me? So looking at basically the entire network, competitive. Here we look identifying your competitors in the market. Who's the different market players? Um, in that area that's operating. What's the different pricing that they're offering, the different services, value adds that they're offering. So you can also strategically position your warehouse so that you have different opportunities for diversification, differentiation, customization, personalization, and all of these good things that comes with you being or having a competitive advantage. Then we have economic trends. So you want to consider both economic and demographic trends when you influence that can influence your warehouse location. Whether it's your population growth or unemployment rate or what your customer is spending, all of these things directly impacts where you decide on staying or sitting in terms of your warehousing space. Okay. Then we want to get into the value chain in Southern Africa. So basically what I did here is we obviously working in an environment or living in an environment in Southern Africa where there's a lot of unique economic, social, environmental factors that form part of value chains in the specific region that we're living in. So I just want to touch on a few of them, right? So one of it is agriculture. Obviously, we have a huge focus on different crops like maize and wheat, sugarcane. Um, a lot of it is exported because of the quality of our our produce. So the value chain here is like, you're looking at farming and processing, packaging, distribution. Small time farmers are actually quite major role players in this regard. Um, then we want to look at mining and looking at minerals as well. And in this case, it's like gold, your platinums, your coals, your coppers, all of these from an exploration and an extraction and a processing perspective. This is how we then create jobs. We're transferring or value addition from a raw material to create a lot more jobs that can generate economic growth, can reduce dependency on imports and all of these things. Then we've got manufacturing, which is more from an automotive, textile, chemicals, food, or FMCG markets. And yeah, it's a lot to do with quality control and distribution, uh, trade and logistics. And this is basically, as we know, South Africa or Southern Africa is the gateway for trade, especially between Africa and Europe and Asia and America as well. So the logistics value chain, a lot of it has to do with transporting and warehousing, customs, freight forwarding, all the good things that basically come with facilitating trade and supporting economic growth, economic integration within the specific region that we operate in. Tourism and hospitality. So we all know our country is very well known for natural beauty, whether it's wildlife or our heritage, our culture, and also tourist attractions. So looking at things from a value chain, it is your accommodations, your tourist operations, your hospitality services, all of this drives a lot of economic development, drives job creation, and also brings in a lot of foreign exchange, currency, and earnings into the region itself. We have energy and infrastructure, the good old ESCOM story. So we know that we face a lot of challenges, especially with energy access, with reliability, with sustainability. So the energy value chain, a lot of it is, your distributions, your consumption of um, electricity, renewable energy sources. So there's a lot of investment in energy infrastructure and renewable energy projects as well. Then we go into IT or ICT, so information and communication technology. And here it's where you want to drive innovation, connectivity, promote as much economic development, especially with now going into the digital services, e-commerce, the omni-channels. You need access, you need reliability to good information technology so that there's a lot more productivity. There's a lot more competitiveness. You're also included a lot more in like the digital economy itself. And then lastly, it's a social environmental sustainability. And here we know we face a lot of challenges from a Southern African perspective relating to poverty, unemployment, environmental problems. So the value chain here is putting a lot of focus on inclusive growth, making sure that there's social development, um, bringing in businesses that have strategies towards corporate social responsibility, green manufacturing, green energy, renewable energy. This all promotes sustainability at the end. Okay. th- Then we're going to touch on a little bit about regional regional warehouses. So when we're talking about regional warehouses, we're going to take it from or take it to a global scale. Okay. Um, and it just sort of puts things into perspective on what's available out there from a global perspective compared to what we have here currently operating in South Africa. So you want to look at the different characteristics, the different features, etc. So the first one is North America. So when we're looking at different warehousing in North America, a lot of it tends to be much larger in size, meaning that there's quite a vast land availability and there's also quite a big demand for like distribution centers. So a lot of your warehouses in North America are located in like suburban or rural areas, but it's also situated near like transport hubs, um, where there's a lot more. efficiency. There's a lot more access to transport networks so that they can service the greater e-commerce, the greater omni-channel, especially with them leading towards a lot more of like a modern technological advanced warehousing where they have a lot more automation, they have robotics in their warehousing. A lot of it is there so that they can improve as much efficiency as possible and also do a lot more from a fulfillment perspective. If you're saying your target's going to be picking up 100 orders, you are basically communicating to your robotic or to your automation or your tech, telling it that you need to be pulling out X amount of orders. Um, then we want to look at from a European perspective. So warehouses in Europe is quite varied in size. Um, so a lot of it is based on what land is available, what sort of urbanization is in the country itself, and also a big part of it is regulation. So in areas that is quite densely or smaller populated, like urban areas, the warehouses tend to be a lot more smaller. So meaning that they are more vertical than horizontal. So multi-storied basically, as far as it goes, so that they can optimize the land use that they currently have. And they also minimize as much of the environmental impact that they would be. So you're looking at different urban logistics centers so that you can meet last mile and e-commerce fulfillment so that there's a lot more sustainability. In Asia, um, so it is quite diverse in terms of the size or the functionality because of the region being so highly populated and and also quite vast in terms of geography. So in countries like China and India, the land is a lot more abundant, meaning that the warehouses tend to be a little bit larger in size, scale. They're able to accommodate a much bigger growing demand for manufacturing or production. Different, distribution centers that would accompany that. Whereas in populations or areas that is very smaller populated, there's more of a multi-storied approach where they're optimizing that land use. They also have a lot of space constraint, so they try and address that with having a multi-storied approach. Tech innovation, automations also big driving force from an improvement perspective in efficiency and their warehouses, etc. We have Latin America, and in Latin America, it's quite varied in size. So um, a lot of it is based on the infrastructure that they have available, what is their market demand. So in countries that have quite a robust economy and also quite a robust logistics sort of infrastructure, those tend to be quite modern. It's very well equipped. It's got the tech and the innovation that's required. It's also a lot of times more strategically located near a transport hub. Whereas in areas that's less developed, the facility or the infrastructure is inadequate. The warehouses are a lot more smaller. The tech is a lot more smaller or less advanced, actually. So there's a lot more challenges for them, especially in logistics and in supply chain. Then we have Africa. So when we're looking at warehouses in Africa, there is quite unique challenges, which is infrastructure or security, the different or the changing of market demand of customers. So when we're looking at sort of like bigger cities, the tend to be a little bit because of the constraint of land, there's limited investments that's available for the infrastructure. But in regions or in areas that is growing, where there's booming trade activity, booming economies, or a better economy, there is a very much of an increasing demand for modern, more efficient warehouses that have better technology, better warehouse management systems that's supporting the functionalities of that business, whether it's manufacturing, trade, distribution, production, it's supporting everything. So that's basically an idea of what the regional dimensions are looking like, especially from a global perspective. Okay, then we go into urban spatial. So when we're looking at urban spatial context, you're basically referring to a location of place or an object, or basically how it relates to something itself. You know, is this location or warehouse located near a highway or an industrial area? Why is it placed there? How does it function in that community? So asking all of those relevant questions. Um, so when we're looking at from a location perspective, your warehouses in urban areas are most typically situated near a major transport route, whether it's a highway or a railway or a port or anything there that creates efficient movement of goods in and out of a city. When we're speaking of land use and zoning, here it is the location of your facility in that urban area that is influenced by different regulations, whether it's land use or whether it's zoning. The local government, okay, South African government, may have certain areas that is only accustomed to industrial use or commercial use, and it may impose a lot of restrictions on the type and the size of the warehouse that's allowed within an urban area. So your warehouse must comply with those regulations, whether it's a building height, whether it's the size of the building, whether it's a parking requirement, or anything from an environmental perspective. Then we've got warehouses in from a warehouse design. Often you want to have as efficient design as you possibly can, where you're optimizing the land use that you have. You want to maximize how much of storage you've got, whether it means including shelving, etc. So you may have a multi-story building and you have quite a high density layout where you're accommodating all of the vertical storage. So you can also minimize the steps that you take in that specific facility. A lot of automation, a lot of WMS, a lot of advanced technologies, anything that includes the actual design and purpose of that facility. Then we have last mile delivery and the e-commerce fulfillment. And here, urban warehouses actually feature quite prominently when we're talking about facilitating last mile or e-commerce, especially if it's in an urban area, because they serve as um, quite a strategic player in the supply chain because you enable fast, you enable efficient delivery directly to a customer's home or to their working place. So urban locations or urban warehouses are strategically located closer to residential areas um, so that you can minimize your delivery time as much as possible. Also have a little bit of a limitation when it comes to transport costs. Nowadays, a lot of people are opting for counter services. So it's obviously situated somewhere closely to a shopping mall as well. Then we've got transportation and access. And here it is basically your convenient access to a highway or to a freeway, any sort of public route that facilitates the movement of your goods in and out of a facility. Environmental consideration, and here it is adhering to environmental regulations and sustainability in order for you to mitigate the impact of your facility on the environment and the communities that surrounding it, whether it means going into green building practices, maybe it's solar paneling, energy efficient technology, maybe it's rainwater harvesting system. So all of these things basically that can help with energy, minimizing energy consumptions or reducing carbon emissions. You want to be able to promote a very good environmental stewardship at the end of the day. And then lastly, it's looking at the integration with urban fabric. Okay. So when we talk about urban fabric, you're talking about the fabric of the city itself. and you want the warehouse and the city to basically coexist the best way that they possibly can. So a lot of times what's happened is they've sort of integrated in a community that's surrounded by residential areas, commercial developments, maybe it's recreational amenities like a park or a gym. Um, but you also need to take into account there is a lot more traffic, there is a lot more noise, and there's a lot of times there's visuals that impact the area. So if you're looking for something that's a lot more visually pleasing, maybe best to go into something more regional, which is more industrial than going into an urban. Okay. Okay. Then we're going to talk a little bit about urban structure. So your urban structure is basically the physical layout or the pattern of where something is situated in a city or an area, whether it is number one, land use patterns. And this is more prominently in urban areas where there's a there's different types of land uses, whether it is residential, commercial, industrial, and basically these patterns reflect the um, sort of activities within the city and how you allocate the land for different purposes. So, like urban land use patterns can vary, whether it is some a population size or a community that's very small, or it's a mixed use neighborhood in a city, or it's got a low density suburban development, whatever the case may be, that's how you would analyze land use patterns. You've got central business district, which is your CBD, most times is a core of that specific city. You've got high-rise buildings, tall buildings, a lot of commercial activity, surrounded by office buildings, corporate headquarters, fashion shops, retail shops, restaurants, so all of the good things that come with it that pushes it to be quite busy. You've got residential areas, which basically consists of the neighborhoods, the housing developments, different housing or apartment complexes, basically where people live. Industrial zones in urban areas are more designated around manufacturing. Um, so it may be a factory, a warehouse, a DC, logistics facility, basically that's supporting manufacturing or production. Um, and just to facilitate the movement of goods and materials. And then you've got commercial corridors, which is basically strips of land amongst a major like transport route, um, like a highway, for instance, that is quite concentrated, meaning that there's a mix of like a retail store, a restaurant, different like service offering, entertainment areas, etc. Okay, then we're going to run into a little bit of the definition for land use and zoning. So when we're talking about land use is basically the activity or different purposes for which the land is being used, whether it is a residential, commercial, industrial, recreational, and all of these uses. It basically shows how different pieces of land are occupied, how it's developed, and how it's utilized within a specific area. So there's different terminologies for it. So this allows for a lot more flexibility. It allows for adaptability, especially when consumer needs have changed, the market demands have changed. So there's a lot more from a comprehensive analysis perspective of how you can strategically allocate the land for different uses based on what your planning is at the end of the day. Then we look at zoning. So zoning is from a regulation perspective, it's one of the tools that's used by government to control and regulate the land use within a specific area. So you divide the land into different zoning districts, and each zoning district basically has a zoning manager or an officer, and then they would establish the different rules and regulations and different standards that the building should have or the land should have. If a building is on the land, what's the height of it? What's the lot size, the parking lot, the different perimeters, all of these things. Um, and they also operate a lot of times through a legal framework. Um, so it's enforced through different permits, maybe different building codes. Uh, you can have different land use or enforcement mechanisms just so that you have compliance with the zoning requirement. And then the last one that we're going to go through is called site level context. And when we're looking at site level context specifically, it is looking at the actual site that you are going to be wanting, okay, for the better word. So it is analyzing the specific characteristics that that goes on with that particular site. So we're going to look at your proximity to market, and a lot of it has to do with the location. Um, So with site selection, your process is you need to identify your location. You need to look at factors like your proximity to your market. What's the different transportation networks in there? What is your labor supply? So looking at all of the different factors when you are choosing that specific site. Access to transport networks, so the different accessibilities, it means that you need to understand where's the situation in terms of your transport sector. Is it easily accessible to, for efficient inbound and outbound logistic operation, where you can also reduce cost? There's availability of land and cost, and also size. So different warehouses so is there loading docks? Is there parking areas? So similarly, I gave you that example of my experience. Um, Zoning and regulation or land using. We had gone through that, but it's zoning designations, what sort of requirements is needed, height restrictions, parking regulations, site layouts, what is the design of your building going to look like, and any sort of like development approval from a government perspective is obviously required. Infrastructure and utilities, and this is from a electricity, water, the gas, the sewage, all of the important things that comes on our monthly bills. So with site level consideration, you want to basically assess the capacity and the reliability of that utility service that's supporting your warehouse and support. Then factors or environmental impact. And here it's like, especially when you're doing a site level assessment, it's looking at or evaluating like soil conditions, the drainage patterns, maybe how suitable is the site for what you require? Is there a flood risk? Is there any environmental regulations that influence you selecting that site and the designs or the decisions you want to make in order for you to build upwards or build sideways, wherever it is? And then future growth. So a lot of the times when you're looking at from a site level perspective, it includes planning for future expansion, how can the facility accommodate growth changing in your market conditions? If your demand increases, your supply is going to increase. Can they then adapt for that? And also if your business requirements change, maybe you want to include another product line into your business from a manufacturing perspective. Is the site flexible enough in terms of design or layout or the infrastructure to scale up or scale down? And can it evolve then over time as you grow your business? Um, so basically looking at quality things, whether you're looking at site level or regional or urban, um, it's basically creating a very vast understanding of the different factors that wants businesses to have in order for them to make the most informed, best business decision about the warehouse that they want to choose. Whether it is location, accessibility, population, your regulations, everything that we've now spoken about, how best can this informed decision about your warehouse site or the development or your operation can best optimize your supply chain performance. And also at the end of the day, you want to achieve your strategic objectives. So how can it best help in that case? That basically takes us to the end of learning unit 2. It is quite simple. Even when you go over it in the textbook, you do know that there's 2 questions coming out in the assignment from this learning unit. In our next session, we're gonna go over forecasting, and we're going to go through the different strategies or the different forecasting tools that we would use. Um, so yeah, if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to contact me, especially if it's an assignment related question. Um, I'll be more than happy to help you. Okay, guys, have a fantastic evening and a great weekend if you have no questions.